This show is meh, which, as a verdict for a franchise with as much cultural impact as Halo, is in itself damning. They've taken a franchise which has lasted for 20 years, 8 mainline games, 2 RTS titles, 2 mobile games, an arcade experience, and countless books and comics, with a story which keeps fans intrigued and debating years after that story was first told, and turned it into a fairly flat tale of mystic artifacts, oppressive militaristic regimes, rebellions, and a sandy, out-of-the-way planet which seems to be strangely central to the goings-on in the galaxy. There have been some excellent recent examples of genre works being adapted to the small screen. Both Game of Thrones and Arcane stand out for their ability to draw in viewers outside of their core audiences. How will Halo fare? This is a review of the entire season. I'm not going to review every episode, but I'm going to explore what went right and what went wrong with the first season as a whole. I'll be discussing the choices the writers have made, and at the end discussing whether there is any hope for Season 2. We've heard that before. The Silver Timeline. Right, let's just get this out of the way. The changes to the existing canon are fine if done for the right reason. If events needed to be changed for dramatic tension or pacing, then this makes sense. Game characters aren't always the most fully realised, so additions or tweaks to their motivations or actions are fine if the payoff is dramatically satisfying.
Am I right, Marines?
Sir, yes, sir!
Unfortunately, the show seems to have made some decisions which have to be reconciled as the show goes on, and for me these are bad choices to have made, and I feel they've painted the writers into the corner they now find themselves in. You've got characters sometimes bear little resemblance to their in-game counterparts, which would be fine if the choices made the show more compelling or surprising. Sadly, the show feels bland and generic. Still, it's not all bad. So let's start with what's good about the show. Man, this was harder than it should have been. Some of the effect shots are incredible. The profits are amazing. In particular, the mix of animatronics and CGI is very convincing. We just haven't seen enough of them for reasons I'll get onto in a minute. Some of the combat is impressive. There are a few set pieces which really pop, and the Covenant in combat are clearly formidable. The violence is also surprisingly graphic given the somewhat young teen tone of the rest of the show. Cortana, despite my initial criticism, is well done.
Sod off!
But I give most of the credit for that to Jen Taylor's acting rather than the animation or the look that they've given her. Halsey is also the right kind of crazed sociopath. I find her scenes very watchable, perhaps because she's the most like her character from the games. The scene where Marquis is rescued by the Covenant is well done, it's dramatic and looks good and is generally okay. Establishing shots across the show are well done, in particular High Charity, which looks incredible to me, and the physical sets are also well done. The props and Spartan armour are on point, and the Warthogs look exactly as they should. The show looks expensive in places, and so far it hasn't been a reason to pull me out of the world while I've been watching. And that's pretty much it for the entire 9 episodes that we've seen so far. What's bad? Let's start with the worst aspect of this show. Chief as the Chosen One, quite literally missing the point of the entire Halo story. In the games, many humans have the abilities which in the show make Chief special. This is a somewhat minor point in the games, but underpins lots of the story in a very subtle way. By setting Chief apart as some sort of messiah who was fated to be chosen by Halsey to become the ultimate warrior and save humanity, he strips Chief of one of the most iconic things about him. He wasn't born special, he became extraordinary through augmentation and training. What makes him special isn't his genes or fate, it's his ability to always continue the fight no matter the odds.
Master Chief, you mind telling me what you're doing on that ship?
Sir, finishing this fight.
The closest we get to this in the games is this line from Cortana.
But you had something they didn't. Something no one saw but me. Can you guess? Luck.
And even that was just one line. The TV show seems to be building an entire story around John 117 being special, Marquis or the Covenant human. Why did we need to put a human face on the Covenant? The only reason I can think of is it was for budgetary reasons. The mix of animatronics and CGI on the profits looks expensive, and for a show with this setting could have taken a significant part of the budget. By making the Covenant have a human face, they keep the threat or conflict front and center without spending half the budget on CGI. I get it. It just does nothing for the story and is a whole lot less interesting for the casual viewer. Let's face it, the villain of this piece is a short blonde with a killer finger. The mad guy, the story reveal. Perhaps the reason we all still remember Halo CE, outside of the gameplay and the compelling setting, is the story. What appears to be a straight up and down shooter against an alien race set on a strange futuristic world takes a massive left turn when the Flood are encountered and the true nature of the Halo ring is revealed. In these moments, the true scale of the universe is revealed or at least hinted at. Imagine if we'd known about the Flood and the nature of the ring at the beginning of the game. It's a whole lot less interesting, and this is where we find ourselves with the show. Why do we need to know about the ring at this stage at all? It will be enough to know that the Covenant are on a genocidal crusade against humanity. We don't need this story element just yet as we work towards the fall of Reach. Soren's asteroid. This entire setting is where the show goes completely off the rails for me. It's uninteresting and generic and serves little purpose other than giving Chief somewhere to go that isn't the UNSC. This is an awful example of world building. And why the fuck is there always a guy on a motorbike? Is that supposed to make it gritty? This setting demonstrates one of the core problems with the show. Generic characters have generic encounters in generic locations. Soren. What is the point of this character other than to give Cortana connection to the Chief and some plot and Spartan armor against the army trying to kill her? This entire story could have been cut completely and the show would have arguably been better for it. The forced nudity. So unnecessary and completely misses the tone of Halo. Nothing wrong with sex and personal relationships. After all, they add to the emotional punch when some of our characters inevitably lose their lives. But intimacy isn't to be found in a crack of this man's arse. Dialogue. There are very few conversations that aren't about moving the plot forward. No one talks like a real person, which leads me to feel very little for any of these characters. As Late Night Gaming says,
the spoken words of the actors is not that good.
Your rage blinds you to the truth.
Rage is all I have left.
Madrigal. It appears that the full significance of this planet will be fleshed out in the fullness of time, but right now, what is the point of this planet and its people? If they needed to show a civilian human side, why wasn't it the humans or civilians on Reach? When the fall of Reach happened, will we actually care? Now when they glass the planet, what consequence is there for the audience? The main characters should all survive, so we're left with the destruction of a generic future city being destroyed. It would have been far more impactful to see the homes of characters we were familiar with are destroyed. Instead, all we're losing is a generic looking futurescape and the UNSC headquarters. Big whoop. Everything's rushed. We've got characters thrown together when they should be kept apart, given time to breathe, develop on their own so that we can understand their motivations. When they finally come into contact, we would understand what they both want, and the resulting tension or momentum to the story feels earned. Game of Thrones did this expertly for 5 seasons with many more factions and characters. Instead, in Halo, Quan and the Chief are thrown together in the opening minutes. The problem is we don't know this person. Why should we care if she dies alongside the rest of her family or not? The show then waits a further 6 episodes before explaining why Quan's father was fighting the UNSC in the first place. The problems were there from the very beginning. In many ways, the problems for the entire season are present in the opening episode. Exposition-heavy dialogue, random characters we don't care about, characters whose actions bear little resemblance to their in-game counterparts, inconsistent CGI, and precious little of what makes Halo Halo. Quan and her friends are introduced and quickly killed. An entire group of people killed in quite a graphic way, but we know nothing about them, so why should we care? Spartans, the UNSC and the Rebellion are all explained in an exposition dump. And then 5 minutes later everyone is killed. We know even less about these characters, except save Quan and her father, so why should we care? And then, rather than build a story based on interpersonal relationships in the midst of a galactic conflict, we introduce a magic MacGuffin, which makes our hero act completely out of character as a way to kickstart the story. The episode ends with 2 characters with nothing in common, thrust together by a magic stone. Normies are wondering what's going on, and Halo fans are wondering why a series with such a massive cast of characters needs an entirely new one for the Chief to play off of. This feels like it was made by people who have little understanding of Halo or why we the fans stick by the franchise through thick and thin. Compare the comments of the showrunners before Halo was made to those made by Peter Jackson before making The Lord of the Rings. They wanted to understand the world and not put their own stamp on it. They understood why the books worked and were able to distill that essence into a new medium that pleased the vast majority of fans. They didn't, or rather couldn't, include every aspect of the books, and the films are better for it. They worked to understand the themes and the characters and made them central to the story. In contrast, the makers of the Halo TV show have taken the basic premise of Halo and set it in an alternate timeline. This actually makes sense if all they wanted to do was perhaps change the order of events from the games for pacing or dramatic effect, but to completely twist it to something generic makes little sense to me. Other than perhaps to appeal to a broader audience, or because they dislike the source material, or perhaps even because they just aren't talented enough to make it work. Who can say? What baffles me more is that we've seen recent examples of fantastic genre titles being adapted. The core concept of Game of Thrones is about as geeky as it gets, and Arcane is pretty niche even for me, but both succeed in being adapted from their source material in a thoughtful, dramatic and satisfying way which rewards the watcher for their patience with great writing, well-paced episodes, characters to love and hate, and a visual quality rarely seen in small screen adaptations. Will Halo improve for Season 2? Does anybody care? If you've liked this video, hit like and subscribe and let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next one.